Thank you for attending the Peel 2041 Plus Official Plan Review and Settlement Area Boundary Expansion Study public meeting. We're going to wait a couple of minutes to let anyone else join, and we'll then commence the meeting. Okay, I think we can now commence the meeting. Welcome to the Peel 2041 Plus Official Plan Review and Settlement Area Boundary Expansion Study meeting. That's long form for SABE, which we'll be referring to throughout the presentation and meeting. I'm Andrew Goodyear from SVN Architects and Planners, and I will be facilitating the meeting this evening. The focus of this evening's meeting, in addition to the SABE, is growth management and built environment, with 3 technical studies: commercial and employment opportunities assessment, health assessment, and public facilities study. We have a full agenda for the evening. We're going to commence with introductions and an explanation of how to use Zoom throughout the meeting. Stefan from Hemsen will then present a summary of the SABE study and an overview of the growth management and built environment technical studies that support the SABE study. This will be followed by a question and answer session with meeting participants, and finally concluding remarks. Please note that tonight's session will be recorded and posted on the region's website after the meeting in case anyone was unable to join or wishes to view it again. And we will be using Zoom's chat function as well, and everything in the chat will also be part of the public record. I will pass it to Tara from the region to facilitate introductions.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tara Bonpansera, and I'm an acting manager at the Region of Peel, and I have also been working on the Region Settlement Area Boundary Expansion Study. I'd like to welcome you to our session this evening for Peel 2041 Plus, the Settlement Area Boundary Expansion Session number 1, where we're focusing on growth management and the built environment. Before we begin this evening, it's appropriate to acknowledge the lands on which the Region of Peel operates, part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for this land. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe and Chippewa people, the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are the direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, give our respect to its first inhabitants. This is the first of 4 sessions being held this week, and we're looking forward to sharing the results of the 3 technical studies that Andrew mentioned. We're very interested in hearing your comments on the draft results of these studies. As you are aware, Peel has been one of the fastest growing areas in the province and in the country, and we know that this growth is going to continue, with the province just recently releasing a new 2051 growth target of 2.28 million people for Peel by the year 2051. The Settlement Area Boundary Expansion Study is one component of the region's official plan review, which is being updated to ensure the region is well positioned to guide growth and development over the next 30 years in a responsible and sustainable way. We also find ourselves working to get your input in unusual times. In more normal times, we would have been gathered in an auditorium or library, all of us looking at display boards and having a chance to have face-to-face conversations. But this evening, we're going to need to work together and share our information in a different way. We hope you'll be patient with us as we work through this new approach. You will hear, though, that there are many ways to provide your input beyond the sessions this week, and we have time to receive comments before we finalize these draft technical studies, which we anticipate to be done by the end of this year. At this time, I would like to introduce a few people. Andrew has introduced himself and will be our facilitator for this evening. We also have Blair Scorgi helping out with the session this evening. Both Andrew and Blair are from SVN Architects and Planners. We also have Stefan, who will be giving us the overall presentation this evening. And then from the region, we have Adrian Smith, Chief Planner and Acting Director, who will provide a few remarks in a moment. We also have Mark Head and Nahida Jamal, both managers at the region, on the call, as well as a number of other regional staff members available to help answer questions at the conclusion of the presentation. There's also staff on the call from the town of Caledon and the cities of Mississauga and Brampton that are joining us this evening to help answer any questions that come up on their work. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and hope that you will continue to be involved in our process. And at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Adrian. Thank you.
So thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Tara. So welcome, everybody. I don't have too much to add to the introductions other than that I look forward to the discussions today. The decision-making around settlement boundary expansion is one of the fundamental parts of our official plan review and municipal comprehensive review at Peel. And that importance is only increased with the recent decision from the province to extend the planning horizon out to 2051 and increase the growth allocation to Peel. The input from Caledon residents and stakeholders in the town is really critical to our settlement boundary expansion work, and look forward to getting that input and your participation today from all stakeholders. Of course, the Region of Peel official plan policies will only be one part of planning for 2041 and 2051. There'll be lots more work required and opportunity for input around settlement boundary expansion and the details of how that'll unfold through the local planning process and secondary planning, watershed planning, phasing and staging work by the town and the region. So lots more to come beyond this. So look forward anyways to the discussion today, and thank you for participating, and back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Tara and Adrian. I'm going to pass it briefly to Blair Scorgi, who's going to explain how to use Zoom.
Thank you, Andrew. Good night, good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us. As Andrew mentioned, my name is Blair Scorgi, and I'm a senior planner at SVN. Before we begin tonight's presentation, I would like to spend just a few minutes to introduce you to the Zoom platform and provide you with an overview of how it will be used for the purposes of tonight's meeting. So for those of you who are joining us on their computer, tablet, or smartphone using the Zoom app, near the bottom of your screen, you will see a button that says chat on it, and it's got an icon. Clicking this will open the chat window. Near the bottom of the chat window, you will see a box that indicates where you can type your messages. Please type your question or any comments you have in that box, and you can do that at any point throughout the course of the presentation. If you're joining us by telephone, you can press *9 to indicate that you have a question. On our end, that will appear as a raised hand, a virtual raised hand. So we will know that you have a question. To ensure that we can cover all the materials tonight in a timely fashion, we will be leaving our microphones muted throughout the course of the meeting, and questions will be held until the end of the presentation, following which my colleague Andrew Goodyear will facilitate a question and answer period. Questions in the chat box will be read aloud by Andrew. If you're joining us by telephone and you have pressed *9 on your microphone will be unmuted at the appropriate time. Your name or the last digits of your phone number will be called upon, and you will be asked to state your question. To ensure that everyone has the opportunity to participate in tonight's meeting, we will ask you to limit your questions to one at a time. Once everybody's had an opportunity to ask their first question and have that be addressed, we will then open the floor to additional questions. In addition to the question and answer period, participants who are joining us using the Zoom app will have the opportunity to participate in a series of poll questions. At key points throughout the duration of the presentation, questions will be asked and a poll window will open on your screen. When this happens, please complete the polling exercise by clicking on the appropriate response. Some of the polling questions are single answer, yes or no, whereas other questions have multiple choice options. All polling questions are structured in that manner. Upon completion of the polling exercise, results will be tabulated and shared with all participants in the duration of the meeting, just so we can sort of see the results in live time. The findings from the polling exercise, as well as the feedback obtained throughout the question and answer period, will be summarized in a consultation and engagement report, which will be shared on the dedicated project website in the weeks following the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Blair. We're now going to commence the presentation, which will be delivered by Stefan from Hemsen. Just a reminder that any questions you have will be addressed following the presentation, but feel free to enter your questions in the chat bar at any time throughout the presentation. If you've phoned in, you can raise your hand at the end of the presentation using *9, and we will ask you to state your question. Stefan?
Well, thank you very much, Andrew and Blair. My name is Stefan Czetranovic. I work for Hemsen Consulting, and I'm leading the consulting team that's helping the region with the Settlement Area Boundary Expansion Study, or the SABE study, as Andrew mentioned it. Just on there will be some polling questions, as Blair mentioned, interspersed throughout some of these slides. I just wanted to let you know that these are not intended to be scientific polls at all, and they certainly won't be used to determine where new urban lands are located in southern Caledon. Their purpose is really, for us, it's a consultation aid. We're hoping that they'll give us some sense of A, whether you understand the material that we're presenting, and B, whether you sort of agree or disagree with the general approach of some of these studies. So really the next 30 minutes will be focused on the latest findings of the SABE study. I'm going to spend a few minutes initially on how this study fits into the region's broader official plan review. And apologies in advance to those of you who attended last week's sessions on the official plan, because you're about to hear the same script again. And then I'll also very briefly describe the process we've followed to date. But the main focus today will be on the results of the background technical work, which was released at the beginning of the summer, and which will guide decisions about where best to designate new urban lands in the southern part of the town of Caledon. Now, as Tara mentioned, the SABE study is just one of many being undertaken as part of the region's official plan review. The official plan itself is an extremely important document. It guides, among many other things, how growth is managed and how services are delivered in Peel. But it needs periodic updating to ensure that it reflects the evolving needs of Peel communities, changing provincial priorities, and of course, the rapidly changing pattern of development in the region. So this particular update started in 2013 and will be completed in 2022. The official plan review has recently been rebranded from Peel 2041 to Peel 2041 Plus, because, as Adrian mentioned, the time horizon for growth planning, which the region is required to follow, was recently extended to 2051 under the Provincial Growth Plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And I'll speak more in a minute about these changes and the growth plan. But as you can see from the graphic up on this slide, the SABE study, although it's a very important study, is just one of the many focus areas that make up the Peel 2041 Plus work. And work in some of these other focus areas are in various stages of development, and draft policies for many of these focus areas, including the growth management focus area, were presented in last week's public sessions. Now, the need for the SABE is driven by the reality that Peel region, which is already one of the fastest growing areas in Southern Ontario, will continue to grow rapidly in the coming decades. There's a few figures on the screen here for you. As I mentioned, the regional official plan must conform to the growth plan, the provincial plan, which manages growth in the Greater Toronto Area, in Hamilton, and in an outer ring of municipalities that surround the GTA. And in late August, Schedule 3 to the growth plan was amended to extend the time horizon for growth planning from 2041 to 2051. And this new amendment requires that the region now achieve 2.3 million people and 1.1 million jobs by that new 2051 time horizon. And this change in and of itself represents more than 300,000 more people and almost 100,000 more jobs than what we were previously planning for to 2041. And indeed, the previous 2041 targets represent about 40% more people and jobs in Peel than were living and working here at the time of the 2016 census. So any which way you cut it, this represents very rapid growth that the region must plan for over the next 30 years. Now, no doubt much of that growth can be accommodated in existing urban areas as intensification, mostly in the cities of Mississauga and Brampton, and generally close to where transit is. However, work that's being undertaken as part of the growth management focus area, which I mentioned on the previous slide, demonstrates that new urban land will be required to achieve these population and job targets to 2051. And that new urban land will have to be in Caledon. There simply isn't any available land in the cities to the south. And so the main purpose of the SABE study is to determine the best location for these new lands, both for new community lands, principally focused around residential land uses, as well as lands for the exclusive use of economic activities, i.e. employment lands. And we've approached this study by conducting a thorough evidence-based review of a focused study area, which is located in southern Caledon, within agricultural lands, which are often referred to as the White Belt. 12 technical studies have been undertaken on this focus study area, and the results of these studies, as I mentioned, are going to provide decision makers with information about the characteristics of the land in the focus study area and its suitability or unsuitability for urban expansion. As I mentioned, it's 12 studies. They cover a whole range of topics, from the amount of growth and the form and location of development that might be needed to accommodate growth, to the demands on services like parks and recreation facilities and libraries and roads and transit and water and wastewater systems, and the demands for those services and that will be placed on the region and its local municipalities and other public agencies like school boards. So certainly each study is an important piece of the SABE puzzle. However, clearly we recognize that some of the studies, particularly those whose results depend on the location of development within southern Caledon, will likely be more determinative than others when actually drawing the lines on the map. In any case, we hope that this week's sessions will allow you to weigh in on which study results you think are important for us to consider as we move to the next phase of the work. Collectively, the technical studies, whether they're determinative or not, will help guide the future planning of the SABE, particularly in the subsequent master servicing plans and secondary plans and neighborhood plans that the town of Caledon will be undertaking in the coming years. And you can see from this graphic on screen sort of how the SABE work fits into the overall framework and strategic direction for those local plans. The SABE sets that strategic direction, and then the land use regulations like zoning, the secondary plans, the neighborhood plans, and ultimately site plan requirements for assessing development applications, those come further down the road and are undertaken at the local level. And all of that work will be done once the official plan has been approved. A couple of things to note also about the studies. First of all, as I mentioned, they were posted on the region's SABE project webpage back in June, together with a summary document, and the results were presented to council at the same time. Secondly, the studies are still in draft. So this is just one of many consultations which we're holding on the study results. And we are looking forward to gathering all of the feedback we get on these studies so that we can incorporate them into the analysis and finalize them by the end of the year. So this map here shows you the focus study area, and it's shown in pink. The area was delineated based on criteria developed through a workshop, which was held with local, municipal, and regional staff and agencies. And this map was released for public consultation just before the COVID-19 lockdown in the first week of March. And you can see that the FSA, remember the FSA is the pink area that's the focus of the studies, and it covers almost all of the white belt lands in southern Caledon. But it excludes the provincial green belt to the north. You can also see that it's quite large, and this was done deliberately, in part in order to ensure that we had sufficient land to accommodate additional growth that might arise from the growth plan amendment that we knew was coming. And if you look in the right-hand corner of the map, you'll see there's a blue box there. This represents the approximate land requirement for the SABE for growth to 2041. And the current estimate is that for 2051, that blue box would need to be anywhere between 2 and 4 times as large as what's shown here. So essentially this exercise, if you boil it down to its essence, is trying to fit what's in the blue box into the pink area. You'll also see that the FSA is somewhat framed by significant natural features, such as the valley lands that run on a north-south axis to the west of Bolton, as well as the preferred route of the GTA West Highway, which will likely be the most significant piece of infrastructure constructed in this part of the town. Should note that the highway route that's shown on this map is not the preferred route that was released in August by the province. However, the new preferred route differs only very slightly from the one that's shown on screen. The only major difference is the relocation of the Bolton Highway intersection, the one on the extreme right of the highway corridor. And that's been relocated slightly to the west and may have consequences for land use plans in that area. Notably, the ROPA 30, the so-called ROPA 30 lands, which are currently under appeal at the local planning appeal tribunal, and which are shown here on the map in sort of a yellow hatching just to the north and northwest of that highway interchange. And so then to the technical studies. I'm going to very briefly outline the methodologies that were used, the principles which guide them, and the general conclusions that have been reached. And we've left lots of time at the end of this presentation to answer questions and have a more general discussion on the findings. As I mentioned, there are 12 studies, and purely for presentation purposes, we've organized them into 4 themes. So the first theme covers the natural environment, including physical features, the climate, and the impact of aspects of climate change, and the state of agriculture in the FSA. The second theme addresses the resources in the FSA, both the natural resources and the cultural and archaeological heritage that's present in the area. The hard infrastructure requirements for the anticipated growth in the SABE. So that would be the water, the wastewater, and transportation system infrastructure. Those are dealt with under this third theme. And given that it's this kind of infrastructure that will have a significant bearing on the financial impact of the urban expansion plans, the fiscal impact technical study is included under this theme. And finally, we have the growth management and built environment theme, which looks at the spatial arrangement of community lands through the perspective of community health and public facility needs, as well as the distribution of lands for commercial and employment uses that might be required. And it's this last theme that will be the focus of this particular session. And so then to the general purpose of the 3 studies under the growth management theme. We have, first of all, the commercial and employment opportunities study. This study looks at the suitability of land for economic activity from a regional market perspective. It's actually really 2 market studies. One focuses on employment lands, mainly sort of industrial type lands and business parks, although it does provide some comments about the locational characteristics of major office development. And then the second study is more focused on commercial retail land needs. The second study is the community health assessment, which assesses lands in the FSA based on healthy development criteria. And then finally, we have the public facilities assessment, which looked at the demand for public facilities arising from development, recognizing that it'll be the town of Caledon that ultimately will be determining the form and the location and the design and the programming of the new facilities through its own local work. Each study's approach was tailored to the subject matter at hand, the availability of data on the focus study area, and the local conditions that are on the ground in the area. And so the commercial and employment opportunities study included an assessment of the inventory of existing employment uses. It did a spatial analysis of the focus study area, and it looked at the demographics of population-driven retail demand. The work for the community health assessment involved a more detailed policy review, an assessment of public health best practices, and a spatial analysis of the focus study area. And the public facilities assessment involved a review of provincial legislation and relevant master plans and supporting documents. It also created a very detailed inventory of existing public service facilities. It established current and planned service levels, and it identified growth-related facility needs. So we're just going to focus on the first one, the commercial and employment opportunities study. The general principles for determining the best location for commercial and employment opportunities are laid out on this slide here. And so for making decisions about viable employment lands in Southern Caledon, you need to consider whether the lands have access to labor and are otherwise near existing or planned employment uses. You need to consider whether lands have access to major transportation networks, Certainly the GTA West corridor and other highways, but also increasingly transit infrastructure. You need land that allows for certain types of configurations of properties. So this kind of activity requires extensive lots that are contiguous, arranged in sort of contiguous blocks. And the land needs to be large enough to allow trucks to do large turning circles. And finally, you also need to ensure that these lands are well segregated from more sensitive land uses, particularly areas where there are natural heritage features, and also residential areas as well. And in order for actually, can we just go back one slide? Because I just want to touch on the retail commercial needs. So in order for viable commercial retail lands in Southern Caledon, you need to be close to your customer base. So not only where there's existing settlement, but also where population growth might be likely to occur. To the extent that retail uses like to cluster, you need to be near established and planned retail. You also need good accessibility, but also you need to be visible from major transportation infrastructure, certainly the highway and transit areas where transit stations are going to be. And again, like the employment lands, these lands also need to be appropriately located. They need to complement nearby employment uses, and they need to avoid as well natural areas of significant natural heritage features and systems. And so if we focus then on the employment lands, for this analysis, the FSA was divided into 6 areas. And you can see them in red on the screen. And the preliminary conclusions are that the conditions for new employment land uses and employment land expansion are very good in Area 1, especially in the area designated as a provincially significant employment zone, which is shown in the blue dashed, by the blue dashed line. So Area 1 lies next to existing and some very well established employment lands. So Area 1 is favorable. Area 2 is also favorable. Area 2 has a small employment hub around Tullamore right now. It's got good access to the highway to the north, including on Airport Road, which once widened could be a catalyst for future growth. Area 4 also lends itself quite well for employment lands, particularly in the near and the long term. It's got good access to those highways and good connections to existing areas of settlement, including employment areas. And Area 5 to the north of the highway, extending north of Mayfield West. Although, recognizing that Area 5 has the Brampton Caledon Airport, which may attract employment uses, but recognizing too that Area 5 is a bit further afield from some of the other areas, so probably is, in terms of the timing of development, is probably a bit further on in the 30-year time horizon than areas 1, 2, and 4. Less suitable areas are Area 3, focused north of the area around the rural settlement of Sandhill, just quite distant from established employment areas, and Area 6, which doesn't have a lot of employment area on which to build on. And so I think we can skip by this slide, which is essentially what I just stated, and we can go to our first polling question. So just please remember that these are being used only to inform, well, mostly to inform the Q&A to follow, and give us a sense that we're communicating the information to you clearly, and that you think we're on the right track. And so the question here, to which you can answer yes, no, or don't know, is do you generally agree with the principles that have been used for locating employment land that I just described? And we'll give you a few minutes to answer there. And remember, there aren't any rules about how you answer this. You may totally agree or you may totally disagree. You may agree with 3 of these principles that are on screen and not the 4th. Or you may agree with all 4 and think there's a 5th. So it's completely up to you as to how you answer it.
So this was my error. I meant to ask this polling question at the beginning of the presentation, so we're going to interject it now, just so that we can have some responses from you. The first polling question we wanted to ask generally of participants was, where do you live? Brampton, Caledon, Mississauga, or outside of the Peel region? So please take a moment to answer that. We have one more general question, polling question for you, and then we'll return to the poll question in the presentation. Okay. I think everyone's had a chance to answer, who's able to answer. I don't think the host can answer, so that's just the participants. So looks like most people are actually from outside of the Peel region. We can move to the next question. Oh, there we go. The next general polling question we have for you is, what best describes you as a participant today? And you can select all that apply: resident, farmer, business owner, member of the development or building industry, a non-governmental organization representative, a local municipal government partner representative, or other. Great, thanks for voting. We'll share the results on that. So we have a few residents, several members of the development and building industry, and a few representatives from non-governmental organizations and local municipal government partners. Thanks very much. And we'll go to the poll question that was asked during the presentation. So this question, looking at the employment study, do you generally agree with the principles for employment land location to be considered when identifying the location of the SABE? Great, thank you. I think that's everyone who's voted, so we'll share those results. The majority of you do seem to be in agreement with the principles, with 2 who don't agree and 1 who doesn't know. Thanks very much. We can return to the presentation.
Thank you very much, Andrew. By the way, I just think that this poll function is fantastic for this kind of work. So I'm really pleased that we're able to do it. Of course, somewhat holding my breath at some of the questions and answers that are going to come in, but it's very, very useful for us on the consulting team, certainly, and those who worked on the technical studies to get this kind of live feedback in this way. So thank you for participating with that. So just going to speak then about the commercial retail analysis. This analysis lent itself to dividing the FSA into 5 sub-areas that you see on the screen here. And the preliminary conclusions are that the conditions are fairly good for commercial retail expansion in Area 1, including in the provincially significant employment zone. Area 2, again, building on existing uses in Tullamore and along Mayfield Road to the south in the northern part of Brampton. And Area 4, where again we have good visibility, accessibility to highway intersections, especially for major retail development, and lots of demand from population growth that is extending northward from Mayfield West. And less suitable areas are Area 3 again, that pocket around Sand Hill north of the highway, and Area 5, that area in the southwest part of Caledon, where there's fairly low population now, and sort of perhaps more suitable for neighborhood retail, but not much more than that. And so again, if we could just go through the same exercise with this poll, based on the principles that I described a few slides earlier, which are set out here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Adjacency, proximity to existing settlement areas, population growth, proximity to existing retail clusters, access and visibility to major transportation infrastructure, and the appropriate configuration and segregation of these kinds of lands. Do you agree, yes, no, or don't know with this general approach that has been used?
Just give it a moment for everyone to respond. Okay, I think everyone's responded. Feel free to share the results. We have the majority of people indicating they do agree and one person indicating they don't know. With respect to this poll and the previous one, if you said no or didn't know, please feel free to jot down your reasons and we can ask you at the end just to explain what your concerns might be.
Okay, great, thank you, Andrew. So moving now to one of the more innovative studies, in my view, that was undertaken, which is this community health assessment. And this tried to assess the lands in the focus study area based on a range of healthy development criteria, which are laid out on the screen here. So some examples of these kinds of criteria would be the density of development, how close an area in the FSA was located to existing higher density development, on the assumption that higher density areas create greater accessibility to a variety of services. They increase the opportunities for walking and cycling and other active kinds of transportation, and creates more opportunities for social gathering, which used to be a very healthy activity, but under the current circumstances obviously isn't, but we are going to assume in the long term that we're able to do that again. So areas that were that lent themselves to higher density scored a little bit higher under the assessment, and then lands which might have been nearer existing municipal services, which were located near existing areas of settlement, which were near transit and active transportation networks, and near local food systems, farmers markets, local food shops, community gardens, community food services programs. So proximity to those sorts of amenities and services had lands scoring higher. And then, of course, you also got higher scores for lands that were quite separated from the kinds of heavy industrial uses that we were talking about in the employment lands study, and well segregated from areas that require, that are environmentally sensitive and require a certain level of protection from development. And so quite an elaborate scoring system was undertaken, and on the next slide, you can see on this heat map how that scoring played itself out. The darker areas on the map are the areas that meet the highest number of these community health principles, and the lightest areas achieved the least number of these principles. And you can see that generally the areas surrounding existing settlement areas of Mayfield West and Bolton and Tullamore are the most preferred for development through the community health lens. Again, we're going to do another quick poll here to see if you think this approach on the community health assessment is appropriate. Do you agree with these principles on which the assessment is based? Yes, no, no, or don't know.
Again, we'll just give it a moment for everyone to answer. Thank you. I believe the results can be shared. So again, we have a majority of individuals who do agree with the principles, but we do have one individual who does not. So as with the previous polls, please feel free to write down any concerns or questions you may have on that, and we'll bring that up at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And then finally, our last study before we can go to the Q&A. So this study responds to a growth plan requirement that there be sufficient capacity in existing and planned public service facilities when expanding settlement areas. And so what we're looking at here is the demand for these kinds of facilities that might arise from development. Again, recognizing that the town of Caledon will ultimately be determining the form and the location, the programming and the design of these kinds of facilities through its own work. And the kinds of facilities we're talking about would be certainly recreation complexes, police stations, fire stations, health and education program facilities, schools for sure, cultural service facilities. And the focus really was on configuring the SABE area to avoid the overlapping of services, to leverage any existing capacity that might be available in facilities that have already been built, to ensure good road access for things like fire stations, and to ensure that we have the land for the provision of new schools that might be required. And generally the conclusions were that there is quite limited capacity in existing and currently planned public service facilities to accommodate the growth in the SABE. And therefore some significant and timely investments will be required from the region, from the town of Caledon, and from the school boards in order to ensure that adequate service levels are maintained, not just for future development, but also for the residents who currently live in Caledon. And so again, we'll do a quick final poll question, and then I think we can move swiftly to the Q&A. So the poll question is, do you generally agree with the approach used to assess public facilities? A look at the policy framework under which these facilities are planned, a look at what exists on the ground right now and the capacity in what exists, and then looking at what kind of facilities might be required to service the needs of new development over the long term.
Okay, I think everyone's been able to vote in that poll. Please feel free to share. So it looks like everybody does agree with the approach used to assess the public facilities. Thank you.
Okay, great. I think we can move swiftly to the Q&A. This is just a summary here, but just to summarize, I guess. As I mentioned, these principles and these preliminary results will guide our next step in the SABE process, and that next step is to begin delineating a proposed SABE area for regional council to consider. But remember that the SABE area is really just the first step in the planning process for Southern Caledon. And there's lots of detailed planning and zoning and site planning to come after this macro level work is completed. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions along with my colleagues on the consulting team, and certainly there's lots of regional and local municipal staff here as well. And I'll pass you over to Andrew.
Thank you very much, Stefan. We do have a number of questions that have come through the chat. Before we get to those, we would like to open it up for people to perhaps raise their hand if they do have any comments they'd like to make on some of the poll results. If they didn't agree with any of the principles or the approaches, we'd be happy to hear your thoughts on that. Or you can enter an indication in the chat that you'd like to make a comment.
I think I see one chat question in there about the health assessment and something that is being suggested that we should consider.
In the chat, I do see the question about the health assessment, which I can get to. What I can do is feel free to enter any concerns or comments you have on the poll results, and we can get to that, but I can actually start going through the questions that you've raised in the order that they were received. So there was a first question about confirming that the Mayfield study area is a priority for SABE in accordance with policy 5.4.3.2.7 of the prop. And there's also a wondering about whether historic planning in Caledon for this area to accommodate growth and the function of this study area and realizing a complete community in Mayfield West is also a priority. So I'm going to pass that to the region just to formally respond to. Tara, I can start with you if that's appropriate.
Absolutely. So we definitely did look at both the Mayfield study area as well as the Bolton study area when delineating our focus study area. So you'll see that they were both included, recognizing sort of the policy framework that is in place. So through the next steps of our study, through the results of these draft technical studies, we would be looking at those areas in more detail as far as the results of the focus study area, the technical study results, and basically coming up with the recommendation. So we do recognize that there is some policy framework there and some importance to that particular area from the council direction, and we are definitely taking a closer look at it through our technical studies and needing to do this in response to the requirements of the growth plan to make sure that we look at the entire area through the lens of all of these studies.
Thank you, Tara. Another question
I was just going to say, Andrew,
sure, go ahead.
if I could just point out to Matthew too, that you'll see that on the FSA map that policy is specifically referenced. And the reason for doing that is because, you know, when the FSA was first drawn up, obviously there was a recognition that those areas need to be in it. So that policy has been front and center throughout this whole process.
Thanks, Stefan. Next question is from Carly, and she asks, does the employment study take into account that there was a certain amount of employment lands already allocated to Mayfield Secondary Plan area that are being directly impacted by the GTA West alignment. More specifically, due to the highway configuration, the land is being split up and may not be able to attract large employment users. I believe I can pass that to possibly Joy, who I know does some of the employment focus as a start, but we can open it up to others if they have a comment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So my name's Joy. I'm a planner with the region. And to that question, so the Mayfield West employment area that's existing right now is part of the 2031 planned growth, or to be completed by then. And so it was long understood that the alignment of the GTA West would be approximately in that location. And so it was understood that would have an impact on employment and employment numbers, and the overall DGA, or designated greenfield area density target for Caledon, can still be met even with the highway alignment going through Mayfield West in phase 1 in that particular area. And then the SABE study will be looking to allocate more employment land for the growth to 2041 and 51.
Thank you, Joy. If anyone else would like to comment, please weigh in.
That's Adrian here. Maybe I would just add that the newly released preferred alignment from the province. I mean, we do have that alignment now, and we'll be looking into that in the next round of work that we're doing, and making sure we're accounting for that most recent alignment that we have from the province for the GTA West corridor. So that's will be part of our work going forward as well.
Thanks, Adrian. We have another employment-related question from John. He says, with respect to employment growth and expansion, what is the region's position or strategy for accommodating dry industrial uses? There are areas in Caledon, such as Tullamore and Victoria, which are either partially serviced or do not have access to municipal services, however, can provide suitable and ideal locations for dry industrial uses, such as trucking and warehousing. Given the rise in the demand for these types of uses, what is the region's strategy for addressing new employment trends and land needs? Great question. Joy, I believe that would again pass to you.
Sure. So to my understanding, with settlement area boundary expansion studies, they typically focus on serviced expansion areas. So I don't think that through this study we'd be considering additional dry industrial employment lands. We do recognize that there are a few existing areas, like the western kind of edge of Bolton and Tullamore, as you said. There are and Sandhill, there are some other areas where it's dry industrial, but through this study we wouldn't be planning for additional lands of that nature. We would provide servicing.
Thank you, Joy. Adrian?
Yeah, just to add, I think Joy's right that the focus of the settlement boundary expansion work is on ultimately, service land. But because we are dealing with such a long planning horizon out to 2051, it is expected, that there's going to be areas that it might be some time before they're serviced. And so looking at staging and sequencing and how you manage the lands. And I know we have heard from Town of Caledon staff and council, and from their economic development staff, some of the challenges that are being experienced with some of the trucking uses that are displaced. And so it is something that we can look at in terms of how that how that unfolds over time, and how we can accommodate and plan for properly those uses and deal with that. So good point about a tough issue that I'm sure going to be something that we look at, but also that has to be managed going forward.
I could add one quick thing to that, if you don't mind, and that's that, through this settlement boundary expansion area, we'll obviously be looking for new employment lands that, sort of back to Joy's point, would be serviced. So we recognize that there are some challenges to that type of use. But that there is a bit of a concern because there isn't anywhere for that type of use to go, and we've heard that loud and clear from a few people as we've consulted. So we're glad to have this comment, and we'll definitely bring it back and give some thoughts to that. But you know, as we look out to growth to 2051, it's going to be, you know, interesting to see how much of the focus study area ends up being required to accommodate that growth, and where servicing will ultimately, you know, end up.
Thanks, Tara. Move to the next question. This one's from Yuri. What is the anticipated timing for updating GM Focus Area Policy Direction Report 2041 to reflect 2051 planning horizon, and specifically local municipal allocations and SABE greenfield density versus built up area intensification targets? Not sure who's best to direct that to. I can start
Hi,
with
Andrew.
Tara,
I can take that one as
thanks,
Duran
Duran.
here. No problem. So Yuri, thanks for the question. As was mentioned last week during the GM Focus Area presentation, I'm not sure if you were able to attend, but we're currently reviewing the provincial forecast and the land needs assessment methodology that was also released by the province to consider land needs. And we're working through the evaluation process to see what needs to be updated. In terms of timing, we don't have an explicit time frame, but I will say that when we do have updated materials, they will go through the standard process to take drafts to council and then, you know, release to the public for public input and consultation. So I would suggest, and I think you're probably already on our mailing list, and you'll be notified when these materials are ready and available for public input and comment.
Thanks, Duran. We have a question from Matthew. An issue with the community health assessment is that it does not factor in the future community form in new areas, nor does it seem to capture the benefits associated with food security, social well-being, pandemic proofing, and proper housing form associated with grade-related housing. Not sure who would be best to address that question.
I'm happy to.
I was going to say, I might hand it to Blair, but I guess I'm going to let Blair answer, but I would push back a little bit on that, Matthew. I mean, I think that actually that study does address the issue of food security. And certainly some of the criteria that sort of was looking at sort of proximity to food systems, I think that was the point of developing that sort of thing. You're quite right, however, that there's no explicit criteria that's been developed to deal with pandemic impacts. And that's simply because of the timing of the study versus the timing of COVID. So that might be something that we go back and sort of reflect on. But the other thing I would say too is that, you know, this is not a study that gets down to the level of design. Urban design matters, which I think is some of the things you're getting into here, and this is just not at that scale yet. So, Blair, I'm sure you'll have other things to add.
No, I would echo that. I appreciate, Matthew, I appreciate the comment. The other thing I'd say is we also don't dive deeply into issues related to housing typologies and ground-related housing, which is an excellent point. We do talk about density. We talk about the need for contiguous expansion. We talk about the need to create complete interconnected communities. It's a bit beyond the scope of this study to dive down specifically into, talking about matters specific to, missing middle housing, things of that nature. So we're operating at a bit of a higher level here. But to build on Stefan's response, with respect to, social well-being, social equity, we had a pretty detailed analysis looking at service proximity, and that was specifically looking at proximity to community services and facilities. And the idea being here that we're trying to promote the development of new communities within a 5 to 10 minute walking distance of some of these critical pieces of social infrastructure. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that section of the report to learn a little bit more about that if you're so inclined. We looked specifically at libraries, childcare centers, schools. We also looked at neighborhood retail, things that we determined to be sort of necessary community-based commercial needs, as well as parks. We also looked specifically at parks, so to talk about the access to open space aspect as well. Under mobility and connectivity, we looked at opportunities for active transportation in addition to public transportation. So we looked at, multi-use trails. I'm just thinking the pandemic proofing, right? We're not looking at it explicitly, but we do look in the community services and proximities sort of layer to proximity to parks and open spaces. We are in this layer of information looking at access to trails and multi-use pathways. We do have another study that looks specifically at access to natural heritage features in the ravine systems and natural open spaces. And we do have, as Stefan mentioned earlier, an analysis focused on food systems that looks at, again, like 5 to 10 minute walking radius, looking at proximity specifically to healthy food options, with the whole idea that we don't want to create food deserts. We want to create these 15-minute communities, neighborhoods. So access to green grocers, grocery stores, farmers markets, butchers, bakers, cheese shops, these sorts of things. We're like specifically looking at this information in GIS and trying to identify community areas of Caledon that were within sort of a close 5 to 10 minute walking radius of these facilities, expressly for that purpose. So certainly there's always more we could certainly do, and your points are well made. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Blair. Next 2 questions I think are both going to go to Stefan. First one, are pockets of land that are adjacent to existing employment and on municipal regional roads being considered to be included in the settlement boundary expansion? For example, the west side of Dixie Road is within the built boundary. However, the east side is not, even though there are services along Dixie Road. That's a question from Jen. And then a smaller quick question from Matthew is, how big is the SABE study area in hectares? So Stefan.
Well, I'm going to deal with Matthew's question first. We don't know the answer to that. I'm not being facetious. It's simply that we know it's going to be bigger than we thought before, but until the growth management work that Duran is leading is completed, which will tell us how much of the regional population and job targets can or cannot be accommodated through intensification to 2051. We don't actually know how much of that population and job target is going to spill over into the SABE. And so that's why I sort of avoided at the beginning of the presentation. But we're estimating right now, and honestly, I'm not sure that I can be more precise. We're estimating anywhere between 2 and 4 times what we're currently working with, which is about 1,400 hectares right now of developable land.
Stefan, I see Matthew's just clarified he means the focus study area, actually.
Oh, I apologize.
But then you just answered the next question from John, so it looks like you've dealt with both.
Well, not quite, because I haven't told you, Matthew. So it's about the focus study area is about 8,000 gross hectares. Okay, so it's pretty big, not counting the highway. And Jen's question, I'm not sure I am the right person to ask this, and I apologize, Jen, simply because I don't know the details about the example you've given, and I'm not entirely sure that I understand the thrust behind your question, and I apologize for that. I'm wondering if there's somebody online who knows where Jen is coming from here.
Can you see my mouse? I think she's referring here. On the opposite side of Dixie, at the settlement, Mayfield West settlement boundaries, up to Dixie on this side, but on the other side it doesn't. Yeah, so I think she's asking if
I don't actually have the map on screen right now.
You don't?
For some reason, no.
What's on your screen?
A whole bunch of people's screens.
Well, maybe I can while you're looking at that, Stefan, maybe I can can start off. So understanding your question, Jen, you're asking about an existing area that is currently outside of the settlement boundary, but adjacent to, just across from an existing employment area on Dixie. And I can, as has been explained, some of the factors that will go into evaluating where settlement boundaries should occur, relate to some of the very practical things that you point out, like contiguous to existing areas, for employment areas that can build on some of the existing attributes and, access to employees and that occur when you're right next to existing areas. When you're looking at, we'll hear in some of the later sessions around this work, expansion to existing infrastructure, all of that will go into the decision making. So some of the things that you're pointing out there will go into that, and the decisions haven't been made yet, so we can't say specifically about any specific area, but those are the kinds of attributes that would play a factor in deciding where settlement expansion should go.
Thanks, Adrian. Question from John. Can the approximate land needs be restated? He missed that.
Yeah, so the best way to say it is that we were working with a land need of around 1,400 hectares for 2041 growth. And that would be both residential and employment. And so now that we are on 2051, we estimate that the land need would be anywhere between double that land need and triple, even perhaps quadruple that land need. So it would be anywhere between, I guess, and it's 1,300 on the FSA map, actually. It's anywhere between 2,500 hectares and 45 to 5,000 hectares of developable land. And the total land area of the FSA is about 8,000 hectares.
Thanks, Stefan. So that's all the questions that have been entered in the chat, but we certainly don't need to end it yet. If you do feel like you'd like to make a comment on some of the poll questions we asked earlier, feel free. Or I have a couple of questions I'm going to ask, and you can think about that and also respond as well. So if you have any other questions, feel free to enter them. Something we'd love to know a little bit more about. Do you have any questions on the overall settlement area boundary expansion study that perhaps we haven't addressed? Do you have any, this one's kind of interesting, do you have any local knowledge that we should be aware of in the study area that may help to inform the SABE study or the technical studies? And finally, were you surprised by any of the outcomes of the draft technical studies? So any of those, we'd be happy to hear your comments on. Anything else you'd like to bring up, we'd be happy to address.
Just going to say, while we're waiting for more questions, I got a couple more figures for you. That so of the 1,300 hectares that were being planned for 2041 growth, 2041 growth, around 950 of that was for residential uses, community lands, and around 550 of that was for employment uses. So that's the split there.
Thanks, Stefan. Matthew's made a nice comment thanking us for hosting tonight and keeping up the good work and completing the municipal comprehensive review quickly, which we will try to do. We appreciate your support. It is a little different for all of us to sort of host a meeting on a public video platform. There's a few kinks, but I think we're all getting through it and learning as we go. So we can keep it open for a couple of more minutes. Please feel free to add any additional comments or questions that you have. We can address them. If not, I can close the evening, and perhaps we'll see you later this week as we do have more sessions. I'll mention that shortly. What I can do is just start to say my closing remarks, but if more questions come in, we can certainly address them. So thank you all very much for participating in today's meeting. I think it went fairly well. We had a good sized group, a lot of interesting questions. More information about the Peel 2041 Plus and SABE processes is available on the region's website at the link at the bottom of the screen. The slide deck from tonight's presentation will also be available on the region's website following the meeting so that you can view the presentation if you missed a few things. A reminder of the next steps, which are also on the screen right now. We're going to be holding additional public consultation meetings on the technical studies throughout this week. We're not going to repeat the same ones. We'll be addressing different ones. There'll be a focus on infrastructure and finance, which I believe is tomorrow, environment, climate change, and agriculture, which is Wednesday, and resources, I think, is Thursday. We'd love to see you at those as well, as I think that'll also be interesting discussions. Following that, we're going to potentially be revising some of the technical studies with the comments that we've received, both through the public consultation and some of the outreach we've done with the region and municipal staff. And finally, there will be an update on the SABE that's going to be delivered to Council in December of 2020. If we do end the session and you happen to have additional comments or questions on the SABE process or the technical studies, please feel free to contact the region to ask your questions at either through Tara or Catherine. Oh, we might have a question from iPhone here. Is ROPA 30 lands being considered in Peel 2041 plus employment residential uses? Not sure who best to address that. Adrian, thank you.
I can address that and just let folks know that the regional council position on ROPA 30 is reflected in the work going forward. And folks who have been watching will remember that council did adopt a regional official plan amendment for the ROPA 30 lands, known as the Option 6 and Triangle lands, to accommodate about 10,000 people, 2,500 jobs. And that decision's been reflected. However, we do recognize that that is before the LPAT for a decision to be made on that, and we're continuing to watch that process as it unfolds. So that will be reflected in our work.
Thanks, Adrian. There was a link posted if you do have additional comments. I've received a notification that it might not be working. So if it doesn't work for you, please feel free to reach out to Tara or Catherine, and we'll make sure that we can get you a response. Give it just a couple more minutes. Question from Jason. Private sector initiatives are essential to promote the development of employment areas. Will the region consider private sector interest in determining areas for employment growth and their phasing? I may pass that to Duran or Joy, might be appropriate.
Hi, Andrew.
No, sorry, Duran, do you want to go? I can jump in.
I was actually going to pass this one on
it
to Adrian, but if you have it, go ahead.
I was just going to say one quick thing, and that is that we've been receiving a number of pieces of correspondence asking for us to, sort of look at various areas and also look at our employment principles as they relate to some of these areas, and comments on how some of these areas would fit in with those principles. So those are definitely things that we're taking a look at through our process. But Adrian, if you have something to add to that, that would be great.
No, I think you covered it. I think the main point I would make is that we're always open to input, particularly, well, by anybody, of course, but if folks who own land or have an interest in land and have specific ideas, now's the time to be letting us know what those are, and they can factor into our decision making. That'll be part of the decision making. Obviously, the policy framework and the aspects of the land and the results of the studies will also be part of it, but we really do welcome and really take in and think about the input that we do receive. So please do.
Thanks, Adrian. Question from Carl. He asked last week if you were reviewing the SABE FSA in light of 2051 plan period. He heard tonight that the region is, which is, I believe, correct. I think all lands abutting Brampton boundary and GTA West corridor, depending on services, should be in the SABE FSA. It's a comment, but we can pass it to Tara, perhaps, to respond, or to Stefan.
Tara, did you want to do this, or I mean,
You go ahead.
I hope we have the same answer. I mean,
Yes, I think we do, but you go ahead.
So my answer, Carl, I think is the same as what I gave last week, which is to say that one of the reasons for doing the FSA the way we did and to make it so large was that we would not need to go back and expand it when the 2051 time horizon or any whatever provincial time horizon and update to those forecasts took place. Because then we would have to cycle back and do the technical studies again. And so the short answer is we do not plan on expanding the FSA in light of the 2051 plan period. We certainly appreciate that you know, there's lots of land in southern Caledon that isn't in the FSA. We feel, I think we feel fairly comfortable that the FSA certainly has enough suitable locations for urban expansion. And you can see even from the sort of preliminary results that we've seen tonight that a lot of the places that lend themselves to expansion are well within the borders of the FSA and focused around those existing settlements of Mayfield West and Tullamore and Bolton. And so our expectation is that, and you'll see if you join us for some of the other sessions later this week, that a lot of the other studies have similar findings. So when you triangulate all of those results together, I think what you'll find is that building on what already exists is going to be a sort of a running theme through all of this. So that would be my answer.
Thanks, Stefan. I note that Tracy has reposted a link to submit any comments you may have. You can open your chat and you can see it at the end of the chat. Similar to the one posted before, but I think there was a small error in it. So if you do open that, you'd be able to post a comment, or of course you can reach out to the individuals here. We do have about 5 minutes left. We're happy to take any more questions or comments. If not, we very much enjoyed the evening with you, and we look forward to seeing you more this week. Okay, I believe that may be it for this evening for the questions. Thank you very much for joining us.